All right. Um, Welcome everyone to first Name the Unknown interview. I have Jim Shaul here with me today. He's my good friend and mentor. We are going to be talking about how to guide people through taking religion more seriously. So I would love for this video to be helpful to someone who maybe finds themselves on my website or found a video or something I've posted and it kind of made them think, well, maybe I haven't thought through religion quite as well as I'd like to, or the spiritual world and stuff like that. I haven't given it as much consideration as I would like, but I'm not really sure where to begin. So I'd love for this video to be just kind of a simple help for someone to walk through sort of their own thinking if they're in that situation. So the point here is ideally for people to use, for us to help guide people through their own thoughts and what's going on in their heads rather than us just dumping what's in our heads into the people that are viewing this. So that's kind of the goal. So just to introduce Jim and why I've tapped him to help walk us through this. You may recognize his name or his voice from the website. He's the guy who's doing the sermons, the Sunday school teachings, things like that are on my website. They're on my YouTube. So there's a little intro for him there, but that's maybe where you recognize him. So I thought partly this would be cool to just kind of introduce people to the face and the person behind some of that stuff there on the website. He's been awesome enough to let me post those things, and I think they're really good resources. So just some of his general background. He's done a whole lot of stuff, but he's been a professor of philosophy, critical reasoning, world religions at a few different places, University of Nebraska, Creighton University, and also Metro Community College University. And he has a BGS in religion, minor in history, an MA in classical Koine Greek, minor in Latin religion philosophy, and he has a JD, a Doctor of Law. He opened and owned multiple businesses and was most recently a professional mediator. Now he's living the retired life in West Virginia, and that's where he's been giving that series of sermons at Hayes Fork Community Church. So I know him, as I said, he's my friend and mentor now. I met him in a class that I took from him way back, probably, gosh, 9 years ago or so now. And just kind of became friends, and he helped walk me through some of these types of things. I mean, there were a lot of people on my journey, but he was definitely one of the people that helped me think through my beliefs about the spiritual world, about religion, and was very helpful in that regard. And I have high trust and regard in his guidance in these matters. So I thought he would be great to help others kind of go through their thoughts about religion. So just a brief outline here. We're going to just kind of talk some general things, Jim's experiences, and then we'll get into specifically guiding certain categories of individuals, whether you believe in God, whether you don't, things like that. We'll get into how to begin thinking about these things. So I will just start by asking Jim to just tell us about his experiences, if you would, Jim, about your what you've seen in the college setting with people trying to wrestle with questions of does God exist and are any of the religions true, things like that. What are your experiences with that?
Well, first of all, thank you for that introduction. And whether or not this is going to be great will be Remains to be seen. We'll see what effect that it has. The I taught on the college campus scene for 27 years. I retired a year and a half ago. And in general, since I taught in the philosophy and religion departments, questions about religion, questions about existence and meaning and all those things naturally come up in those areas. They don't come up in English class, but they come up in these classes. But even at that, they don't come up personally. I don't hear people, certainly in the classroom say, "Hi, I'm searching, tell me what I could do." They don't do that. They might come talk to me afterwards, which is usually what happened over the years, is that people would come to me after class or even after the semester and want to talk because they had their own personal doubts and questions, and they thought maybe that I might be a person who could help them think through those things. They knew that I wouldn't try to force them to do anything, that I wouldn't make them, feel guilty or stupid because they didn't agree with me or anybody else, but I would just help them to think through the things that they were wrestling with, is really what it came down to. So again, the personal questions usually came through that route. I will say that also in general, over the 27 years of my teaching career, that I saw people move more and more from a general theistic position in the classroom to a more atheistic position, or at least agnostic position in the classroom. Early on when I was teaching, you would have people who were declare themselves to be theists and weren't embarrassed about doing so. And then in the last 5 years, particularly, you find that would be rare, that would happen. And I think also I'm not just saying by their declaration of their belief system, but just by the questions that are asked and how people frame their comments about religion. It certainly was clear to me that there's been a move in our country of people away from a sort of expected theistic position. And now it's at least to be an expected agnostic position, and if not an atheist position. And so that being the case, that doesn't mean that they don't have questions. It just means that the certainty of where they stand over a time has been, at least in their culture, has been diminished. So that's been my experience. And
So,
again, I would go ahead.
so there's a lot more skepticism
Yes.
in the college setting. Okay.
Yes, and not only skepticism, but there's more open negative rhetoric towards religion in general.
Okay.
And where 27 years ago you wouldn't see that or hear that in class or even on campus. But what had happened now, it's become almost fashionable to disparage religion in general, disparage faith, disparage churches, that sort of thing. It's been a move to really cast religion and religious pursuit in at least a negative way, if not even worse than that. But as I've told my students over the years, that this is something that would be normally expected, because since the 60s and some Supreme Court rulings, they're essentially and I believe wrongly so, but there's been a lot of people who believed that it was not legal to teach religion in public schools.
Hmm.
And so there was a fairly wholesale removal of any type of religious discussions from the public school setting. And certainly individual teachers could bring it up, but in general, it was not something that was uh, favored in a typical school curriculum. So we have generation of students, a couple generations of students who have grown up with religion being a non-topic in life. And so if you're raised your whole life and you're in school 5 days a week, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and they're told that religion is not to be talked about, they certainly you would expect they'd have a mindset that it is something that is not positive. And at best, at least, it's not necessary to life. Because if there's something necessary to life, they would be talking about it in school. But
Right.
they don't, and so again, they to me, it's the natural outcome of what's happened in the school systems.
Yeah. I remember the class I took, the world religions class with you when I was in college, and it was the first time I've ever really learned religion, in any sort of a formal way. Um, and up till that point, I mean, it was an elective. It was like, oh, a fun little um, humanity sort of. It was, to me, it was almost like learning about culture. Um, just sort of, well, that might be interesting to see what people think about religion and the afterlife and things like that. That might be interesting, sort of expand my mind type of thing. And um, the way you taught it made me really hungry for truth. And well, yeah, these are interesting and things, people think these things, and isn't that interesting? Doesn't that teach us something about the way they are? But also, they're making huge claims that are contradictory to each other, and these
Mhm.
affect the very core of our values and the way we live, and even where we go after we die, and our morals, and just all these things. I'm just thinking, this is like, religion's kind of important. I should figure out if any of them might have some weight to them. And so even just that hunger for truth didn't really exist within me much until I started, probably, taking that class from you definitely helped. Um, have you seen any trends with just truth in general? I know you said people are more skeptical and they're more negative towards religion. Have you seen, people come in and just think, well, that's just not a concept that applies to religion?
In general, I would say there's that same movement in moving away from valuing religion as an important, if not extremely important part of life, to being a nothing. The
Hmm.
same thing I've seen happen with the whole concept of truth,
Okay.
that there's just, well, I was talking about objective truth, because
Right.
there's been a movement towards people believe there's still truth, but it's all subjective. If anyone makes a claim these days that something is true, then the question is, well, says who, and it's true to who? And so they've objectified, they've subjectified truth.
Hmm.
And so even if there was a truth, it would be, let's just say, these days, certainly you wouldn't hear people say this as much nearly back in the 60s, but these days someone could say, well, my truth is I believe in Allah. And someone else would say, well, my truth is I believe in Buddha. And the third party listening to both of them would say, oh, that's cool, they both have their truths, and just accept
Right.
that as normal, and not only as normal, but but as perfectly okay, even if one of those religions said something that was contradictory to the other. They don't worry about the contradictions or any contrary claims within those religions,
Hmm.
because they can have, these two different parties can have their own subjective truths.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not saying this is, I'm not trying to fill people's brains, but it was interesting. I heard the other day someone said it's a luxury to say you have your truth and I have my truth. And the example they gave is, if whether there's water in that well over there or something like that, um, to say, well, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Um, you have your truth, I have mine. People not living well, people that are really just trying to survive, or people whose lives are on the line, they've got to know things and they've got to know them for sure, and that they're objectively true or not. And it's very much, luxury, a luxury of people who have a lot of nice things, and their lives aren't on the line daily, to say, well, there's your truth and there's my truth, and all of that. And people don't live like that. When they're really trying to live, they don't live like that. So it's a
Right.
luxury of the privilege, really, to say you have a truth and I have a truth. It's
Right. And
just
I
lofty
would
living.
completely agree with that. Although it's not only the people who have more difficulties in life who have to face the reality of there being a truth, because even rich people have to ask themselves, is there gas in the car when I
Yeah,
take off to leave for work? You know,
right.
there's a truth claim there. You know, there's gas in the car
Right.
or there's not. And so they
Right.
have to concern themselves. They don't just get in the car and say, well, I'm just going to believe there's gas and not concern myself with it. They
Right.
don't operate that way. So, and from my perspective, and this is just me personally, uh, I don't believe people really do believe that there is only subjective truth.
Right.
They don't. They talk that way. They act that way. But in real life, they can't live that way,
Hmm.
because there has to be truth about the world around us.
Right. Well, let's pretend we've got some people who are interested in truth, and whether there is any, in any sort of religious claims. And I use the word religion a lot on my site and things like that, and it just means any set of beliefs about the spiritual, about God, or anything like that. It's just the most general term possible. So um, let's say someone's interested in this type of stuff. Does God exist? Is there spiritual stuff? Does something happen to me after I die? You got me interested. Maybe it's either true or false. I better decide which, that type of stuff. Um, let's say we've got some people in that boat. How can we help guide them? So I have it divided into different categories. There's different people. They're starting in different places. Either they don't believe
Mm-hmm.
in God, or they do, or they're coming in with a firm religious belief already. So I thought we could go through and just start with each sort of category of person, and hope that at the end we've addressed most of the situations people are finding themselves in as they start asking these types of questions. Um, so we'll start with just the general atheist. Let's say someone happens upon this video and they do not believe in God. I don't believe in him. Pretty darn sure he doesn't exist. Um, None of that spiritual stuff is really the case. We're just sort of we live, we die, and that's it. If he would come to you, or if he would begin saying, well, maybe I better just make sure, what sort of advice, would you give that type of person on how to navigate these issues?
Well, first of all, I would thank them for being honest, because a lot of people aren't. They hide their fears, and they don't want to say them out loud.
Hmm.
But after that, the real question is with someone who comes as an atheist is, how sure are you that there's no God, no spiritual realm? And when you're
Hmm.
talking about no spiritual realm, that phrase is also then inclusive of there's no life after death, because spiritual
Hmm.
realm typically goes along with the belief that I have a spirit, or I am a spirit, and that after my death I continue on. So the existence of God and the existence of the spiritual realm are both, key elements in a person having a belief. So the question is, how sure are you? Because
Hmm.
the way you just framed that, well, I'm pretty sure that there's no God. Okay, that let's just argue this. Let's just say that you are 100% sure, there's no doubt left in you whatsoever that there's no God. I would first of all say, that's rather surprising, and I don't know if I necessarily completely believe you. I think maybe you might have talked yourself into that there isn't a God. But there is, and as I've told my students over the years, that the absolute claim of atheism is that no God exists in the universe, and that is a claim that is essentially non-provable. It's too big of a claim to make, and so the agnostic claim, which says I don't know if there's a God in the universe, or I'm operating as if there isn't one because I haven't seen enough signs that there is one. That's reasonable. That's actually logical to take that position. But to say there absolutely is no God in the universe, I say, how do you know this? How do you
Hmm.
have such certain knowledge? The certain knowledge of the absence of the existence of things is pretty difficult, even on a small scale. But on the scale of the universe, to me, it is impossible to have certain knowledge of the absence of something existing, anything existing in the universe. So I would start with that and say, okay, how certain are you that
Hmm.
there's no God? And if so, where do you get this from?
Hmm.
Um, where do these things come from? I believe the notion of an existence of God in someone's belief system uh, is certainly tied to their experience as they were growing up. And most of us, I believe, have an innate conscience. We're born with a conscience. And so we know that there's right and wrong. And we know that there's things that we do that are right and wrong. And so if you have a conscience and you do something wrong, there's always this inner sense of, I hope I don't get caught. I hope I don't have to suffer the consequences for that. And so the fear of consequences for our naughty behavior is actually tied to our belief in a God. Because if you want to not have consequences for any of your naughty behavior, then you're going to be better off psychologically, I guess, by there not being a God, because they don't have to worry about that stuff,
Sure.
because the thing is, that you were sneaky and did stuff behind your mom and dad's back. So there's things that you did wrong that they didn't catch you and they didn't know about. But just the whole notion of there being a God is generally that God knows everything. So there we can't sneak behind his back. So um, I believe that we all have that notion of I sort of I sort of hope there's not a God out there. I sort of hope there's not something out there that's going to catch me and I have to answer to. So I don't know why a person would have, any individual person might have a strong belief that there isn't a God. I can understand why psychologically they might not want there to be a God. And I remember hearing a person on the radio years ago talking about how when she was young, she was raised in a religious family, but her dad was an alcoholic and would come home often and beat his mom, beat her mom, I mean. And she said that she would hear it, and it was just emotionally devastating to her to have to experience this. And she said she prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed that God would have dad stop beating mom, and he didn't. He beat her mom her whole life. When she was there, she grew up and then moved out. And so in her mind, she said, there's no God, because God would have answered that. There's no God. And so just her experience led her to that. Although, it could have led her to a conclusion that, well, there's a God, but he doesn't care. But if you believe that there's a God who doesn't care, then it's about the same thing functionally as believing that there's no God, because it doesn't really matter. If God just sits up there in his rocking chair and sits there and twiddles his thumbs and just watches and doesn't actually do anything, doesn't interact with people's lives, and isn't a person who sort of has notions of good and evil, then it's irrelevant. He's just sitting up there watching. And so so you can have a psychological hunger to have there be no God, because it'll satisfy your own moral issues. People also can have a fear of there being a God simply because they know that there's life after death, or they think there's life after death. And if that's the case, what happens in life after death is in the hands of that God and not in their hands. They would have no control over that. So to have some other being have complete control over us is not something that's palatable to an awful lot of people. But again, and I'm not in any way saying that if you're an atheist that it means you've been driven to that position by fear. Not at all. There's a lot of atheists who take that position simply because they have seen a lot of religion and religious behavior that is unpalatable. They've seen all sorts of horrible stuff being done in the name of religion, and so why would I want to have anything to do with that? When people do these horrible things to each other. So just the things that they've seen in religion, and also they end up having questions in their head about the whole notion of the rise of science as being the be all and end all of truth. And since science doesn't accept any claims of God, then they say, well, okay, if that's the case. And I remember when I was in middle school, well, they called it junior high back then, but I was in junior high, we had the concept of evolution that was being taught not as truth, but as a different way of looking at the origin and development of life on our planet. And I remember I was raised in a Methodist church, and so as a Methodist, we were taught that God created the universe. Genesis was the correct model, and yet now this is being told that this evolutionary model is just as acceptable. And I remember, literally, I remember sitting in the chair in class thinking, I could accept both. I'll just do that. I'll just accept, they're both true. And so I did. Intellectually, of course, I couldn't, but I did. I said, because I did it without discernment. I did it without actually checking anything. I just said, I'll just accept them both and just move on in my life because I really didn't care so much about it. So, there's a lot of people that are that way, that just, science says there's no God, and science has seemed to do a pretty good job of explaining life and predicting things. And so therefore I'm just going to go with that. So that might be that. So to the first type of people that are fearful, I would say, well, if the fear has driven you to away from the notion of God, I would say, well, that's again, I would say it in a really nice way, but I'd say, that's like a person. Oh, I was just watching a show yesterday, a couple of days ago, and this person is in the interviewing room in the police station, and they've just caught them red-handed, and they have evidence, and so they're going to be arrested, and probably end up in prison. And this person just puts her head down and says, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. I don't want to be here. I want this not to be, is really what they're saying. I want this not to be. And so I sort of liken a lot of atheist positions to being that. I just want there not to be God. And then they find reasons to sort of back that up. But the bottom line is they just want there not to be a God. And I would say, if that's the case, wanting there not to be a God doesn't change anything. If you have a desire for there not want to be a God, let's talk about that. Why do you want that? But I can want there not to be taxes, but there's taxes. Okay.
Sure.
So just because I have some desire for something not to exist because it's quite distasteful to me, doesn't change it. And so the question is there any good argument that might be brought despite your fears, despite your desires to not have there be God? And so and would you be open to, again, just talking them through and discussing them, those types of things? So that's how I would handle that. The people who essentially look at science and say, well, that basically settles the issue for me, I would again, not in any way trying to convince them that religion is the case, but I believe that it is very easy to show people that science, although it is in fact a way of looking at life that has proven itself to be very successful in what it's done, but it doesn't answer all the questions. It's limited in what it can answer, and it can't answer everything, and I'm just gonna just throw this out here real quickly, that science cannot answer the question of why I exist, why anything exists, and what is if I do exist for a reason, why? Do I have a purpose here? Or am I simply, as the old song said, am I simply dust in the wind? Because the idea that there's no God leaves us without meaning. And I've definitely seen that over the decades of my teaching, that more and more students come across my path that don't seem to have a sense of purpose. They don't know who they are and why they're here. And I think a lot of that comes from them coming out of a culture that has abandoned any rooting their belief system in God and in the divine spiritual realm.
Okay.
So does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. It makes me think of so when I was suppose you could say an agnostic. I was young, probably 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there, and I was, reading Richard Dawkins and things like that, and really kind of beefing up my anti-religion sentiments. And I read a book by Richard Dawkins in which he says something to the effect of kind of like what you were saying, where there's very few atheists that are like, I'm 100%. I really don't believe in God, and I sort of know God doesn't exist, or I'm very confident in that. I'm an atheist with a capital A. And in this book, Dawkins recognizes that, and he kind of gives an altar call and says, we need to stop being that way. We need to really, he's calling agnostics to call themselves atheists. Let's not be wishy-washy and sort of maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Let's really be confident in our assertion that God doesn't exist, because that's giving too much sort of to the other side. You're kind of giving too much ground when you're being an agnostic, and you're not being scientific enough, I guess, when you're sort of saying maybe there's God. There's not. It's stupid. It's silly. Just be an atheist. I think he almost says something like, even if you're going to kind of be an agnostic in your head, just stop calling yourself that. Call yourself an atheist. And I remember, I think it was that night I said, you know what? Yeah, he's right. I sort of was converted, you could say, and I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call myself, I'm an atheist. He's right. I'm an atheist. And so, but yeah, when you talk to him and when you really, get down to it, there's very few people that I know of that would really say there's not a God. There's just not. They just say, well,
Right.
I just haven't. There's not enough evidence, that I'm just sort of operating like there's not one, and I'll change my mind if and when the evidence presents itself. Is the type of thing I think most atheists would say. They wouldn't really say, well, there's just not one. There's just not. So
yeah. And I would say they're functionally they're agnostics. Because
right.
if at all you're open, well, maybe someday,
Sure.
there some evidence is there. But if they're saying absolutely there is no evidence and there never can be any evidence in the future that of a God, then they're functioning as an atheist. But if they're
Right.
saying, there's not enough right now, they're functionally an agnostic,
Sure.
which again I believe is a reasonable position. Being a functioning as an atheist to me is an unreasonable position. And if people have been around my teaching or looked at my blog, they can see or they have heard me tell my story about the purple spotted ground squirrel, which essentially shows that functional atheism is in and of itself illogical. And yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that leads us kind of right into the agnostic category. We're going through these categories of people. Is there anything else that you would add then? Let's say you have this conversation with an atheist and they say, well, yeah, you're right. I guess I'm not an atheist per se. I'm just not sure. Or even, there's sort of a spectrum where there's a sliver of, well, maybe there's a God. And then there's some people that are,
Sure.
widely open and they say, yeah, maybe I'm a little more convinced that there might be a God than not, but I'm really just not sure. I'm kind of 50-50.
Right. Right.
Where do I go to find out?
Well, that's first of all, again, I would thank them for being honest, even being willing to say that, because a lot of people are not willing to say that. That's pretty transparent to say such things. Although there are a lot of people who believe that, they really do. First of all, I would say it's important if you are in that position, first off, to recognize that there are risks in being in that position, because there are a lot of competing voices out there. And if you end up listening to a particular voice that is crying for your attention, you may end up finding yourself somewhere down a path that later on you're going to regret. And this reminds me of something that happened to me years ago. There used to be a little Professor bookstore out in West Omaha off Center Street. And back in my younger days, I spent a lot of time in bookstores, buying books and reading voraciously. But I put up a bookshelf just 2 or 3 days ago. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books now. That's all I have left.
Wow.
And I'm perfectly fine with them. But I used to just go to bookstores all the time. And I would always go to the philosophy and religion section, because that was my great interest. But I was in this bookstore, and there was this woman who was, probably middle-aged, probably middle class, and she was in that section too, and she kept picking up these books that were mostly New Age stuff. And not just strictly, Buddhist or Hindu, but kind of New Agey stuff. But and I was curious watching her do this, because there's a lot of other books there in that philosophy and religion section. Here's the Quran over here, and here's the Book of Mormon, and here's the Bible, and all this stuff. But she was just hanging out in this one section down here, and so I was rude and came up and said, so you seem to be searching, and she didn't take offense, and she said, yeah, I'm kind of looking. I was raised in I don't remember what kind of church it was, and I'm just not finding that it's satisfying, and I'm looking elsewhere. And she was raised in and I remember it was a Christian denomination, but I said, I get that. I get that. We want our religion to certainly satisfy some of our innermost desires in life, because it gives us a worldview, and we want to have a worldview that does something positive for us. But I said, well, here's the thing I would like to just point out to you. I said, and again, this was, I don't know how long ago this was, probably 40 years ago. I said, have you ever heard of, and I'm not going to say the person's name, but there was a well-known Christian TV evangelist who had just got in a lot of trouble for being naughty. And there had been 2 or 3 other evangelists who had been called out for trying to line their own pockets. They were getting rich off their religion. And so I said, have you heard of these people? She goes, oh yeah. That's one of the things that I don't like about, my religion or my Christianity, is there's so much of these charlatans out there. And I said, well, I just want you to know that book that you just picked up, that last one you picked up, is written by a guy who recently was deported from the United States for basically those exact same things. He had a harem of women that he had his sex slaves, and he had amassed millions of dollars, lined his pockets to do that. And see, you don't know that from reading that book. You're just going to read his book and say, cool, oh, I like this guy, I want to listen to him. You don't know that. And unless you really have a keen understanding of the background of these people that you're picking up, I think you're at risk. And so I said I would just be careful. And I didn't try to direct her towards one thing or another. I just said, be careful in who you listen to, because it may end up taking you down a path that is going to be harmful to your life and maybe to your spiritual life. So be careful as you do walking down this journey of discovery, that sort of a thing. So it was actually this particular woman who prompted me to sit down and write my that little 2-page document that I have, and I've given out to some of my students over the years, called The Search for Divinity. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but it's a sort of has a logic tree question running down, and you look puzzled.
I'm trying to remember if I've seen this document or not.
Okay.
But,
All right.
do you still have it around?
If you, I do. Matter of fact, if you could
Okay.
share screen, since you're controlling this, let me see if I am able to. You know how to share screen? Give me permission.
Let me see here.
Yeah, we're good, I think. Do you see my screen now?
Yep. Yes, yep. Yes, I do.
Okay. So this is something I wrote, again, probably 30, 40 years ago. I don't remember how long ago. But over the years, I've given this out to students who came to me and had these kinds of questions. And so the first question is there a God? Okay, let's just say for sure, absolutely, there's not. Well, then, okay, there's no need to find him. That'd be stupid and a waste of time to try and find something that doesn't exist. Okay, if you're 100% sure, then don't waste time trying to find God. Now, I would like to talk to them about why they think that, and if it's actually reasonable to believe that, or what's happened in their life that's driven them to that place, because I do think there's something that has driven them to that place. But okay, and then okay, so if the answer is yes, what's the implication? Well, you should probably try and find him. Okay, so if that's the case, then you go to number 2. Question number 2: would knowing the truth about God have temporal or eternal implications? No. So let's just say in this case here, there's a deist God who sits back. Can you see that? I need to make it larger.
Well, I've got you on my phone, so I'm sure it shows up decent on a desktop, but
okay.
a little larger might not hurt.
Let's see if I can make this a little bit larger.
And you could probably send me this, and if people watching are interested, I can post it, or I can send it out to individuals.
You could have it available. Yeah. So so the second one is would knowing the truth about God have temporal or internal implications? If you believed in deism, in a God that sits back up there in on his rocking chair, twiddling his thumbs and just watches, well then no, there's no implication. It doesn't make any difference to real life. So if there's no temporal or eternal implications, don't worry about it. Okay. But if there are temporal or internal implications, or at least there could be, well then the answer is try and find that. Try and find the truth about this God. Because if it makes a difference, you should. It's sort of like driving down a highway in the middle of the night in a somewhere where you don't know if you've crossed over from one state to another. You didn't see the sign that says now entering Colorado. You don't know what state you're in. Is there an implication to how fast you're driving? Sure there is, because there might be a different speed limit from one state to another. And so there would be implications. And so it would be a good idea to find out what state you're in and what the speed limit is in that state. Okay, so because there are implications. All right, so then question number 3, is it possible to know the truth about what God requires of us so we can deal with these implications? And you can say no, because God's never told us. He's kept it to himself. Well, if that's the case, don't try to find out. You're wasting your time. Yes, if it is possible to know what God wants of us, well then try and find it. Try and find it, because it's of value to your life. So anyway, I'm not going to go through all of these, but well, I guess there's only 3 more in this first part here. There's the fact that a lot of people claim to know the truth, yet differ so much. Does it follow that none of them have the right answer? And that's a big one that I've seen over in my years of teaching. That one right there. Well, there's so many religions.
Sure.
You know, none of them are right. That and again, that's something that it's illogical to make such a claim. Just because there's multiple answers to a single question doesn't mean that they're all wrong, or that there's no right answer. Just because there's a lot of wrong answers to a question does not warrant a conclusion that there's no right answer. And so if you say that if it does mean that there's no right answer, well then the implication is don't search amongst the established religions. Go elsewhere, find it elsewhere. You know, go make up your own, that sort of a thing. Or no, it doesn't mean that there's no right answer. Then you have to search the established religions. Okay, where do you go? What's out there? Okay, and then 5, is there a way to sift through the established religions to discover which have truth? Answer no. The implication, just pick one and hope it's right. You know, roll the dice and pick one that sounds good. Sounds good, which again, a lot of people do. They pick a religion that sounds good. They pick a religion that feels good. They pick a religion that fits their value system. That's what they end up doing. And I have strong argument against doing that, because what that does is it makes you the center of truth, because you're trying to have a religion that fits around you. And if that's the case, then again, that makes you the sort of the template that everything has to fit around. And if no, I'm sorry, if yes, then the implication is you should establish search criteria. How am I going to find it? How am I going to find what's right? Question number 6, are there existing objective criteria that would serve as helpful guidelines? And the implication, if you say no, implication is make up your own guidelines. And if there are yes, then you go to phase 2. So I would give this to my students and say, you know, if you really want to search, at least be reasonable and rational in your search. You know, don't just go, you know, pick up a book by somebody who's a good writer and makes you feel good and follow them. Because again, you could end up, you know, like the people in the Heaven's Gate community who ended up, you know, all dying, or the people with the Jim Jones community who all ended up dying because they were following a certain guy. And so there are dangers in where you end up going. And so I encourage people to think about this stuff, to be careful in how you think about it, because I do believe that it has implications. So anyway, I'm not going to go through this whole phase 2, but it's something I certainly can go ahead and email to you so you can have a copy of it.
Yeah, please do. That's perfect.
Yeah, it's actually in the, excuse me, this is from an appendix in that book, Healing in the Wind. It's in it's one of the appendixes in the back, but cool. I'll just shoot you this document so you have it. So I do believe it's important to be careful in our search and to not just grab onto something, because there's a lot of competing beliefs out there, and some of them, like I said, can take you down some dark places. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's what I got to say about that.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And I do, now that you mentioned that, I think I've seen a document like that or something similar like that you've written up, and it's a perfect example of why you are the type of person I've tapped to walk people through these types of questions is because you sat down and written documents of literally how to walk people through these types of questions.
Yeah, and as you can
So that,
tell by the nature of the questions themselves, I'm not forcing or pushing anybody to anything.
right.
I have my own belief system, and I believe that my beliefs are true, but that doesn't mean that I have the right to sort of push you towards one thing or another. And
Right.
one of the things that you said in the beginning of the introduction, is like, why should people listen to me? Who am I? I'm just a guy sitting up here in the mountains in West Virginia. Why should people listen to me? And that question is an unbelievably important question. And to me, the correct answer is, well, I shouldn't. I'm just a guy. I'm just a, I always say I'm just a kid from Millard, Nebraska, who grew up, doing all sorts of stuff. And now I'm an old guy in the mountains. So, and this is the root of why, as I probably said in one of my classes to you, is that I don't let my students call me Dr. Shaul, because to me, I don't want people to listen to me because of some degree I have. I don't want people to listen to me because, I took X number of credit hours, at a school, because people can take lots of credit hours at schools and have degrees and still be wrong. So
Sure.
the reason I believe you should listen is because they have good things to say. Has nothing to do with that. So the question is, does this sound reasonable? Does this sound like it rings true to you? That we should be careful about these things, that we shouldn't just rush headlong into something, that we couldn't, how many guys have gone to church somewhere because they met a hot chick and she was going to church, so I'm just going to go with her, because I want to hang out with her and I want her to like me. And so, there's all sorts of really, really dumb religions out there, and there's dumb reasons to go to them. There really are. And so it's an important thing to take as an important step in your life, and to do something with it that is carefully thought through as you go through. Now, having said that, I believe that there are a lot of people who come to their religious faith without having carefully thought through anything. So
Sure.
not all religious conversions or religious experiences are a result of careful search or even any search. They're just not. Sure. And we have, you've had that common phrase of foxhole conversions. You have people who are they're suddenly in a place where their life is threatened, and they think they're facing imminent death, and they suddenly become a theist, and they do, although I don't believe they actually do. I believe they already were one. They're just now actually acting on it for the first time, sure. Because the question of whether or not there is a God and there is a life after death at that moment becomes the only question that's relevant in life, if your life is being threatened. And so they don't have time to go through all this searching that I listed out up here. They just simply, in their gut, they believe there's a God and they believe there's life after death, and they don't want to be left out in the dark. Sure. And so they cry out that way.
Sure.
So,
yeah, that's a good point. This interview and that document, this type of guiding people through these things is for people with the luxury of time, for certain type of people that say, well, I need to think through this stuff. It's not everyone has the luxury of going through all this, and it's not saying it's right or wrong necessarily to maybe go about it differently, I suppose, you know, and it's not assuming that this is the only right way to come to good conclusions about religion, about God, and things like that. Um, but it can certainly help um, a lot of people in our society. I would think, you know, a lot of these types of people in college and even outside of college that aren't so sure about these things.
Yeah. Over the years, what students have come to me to talk to me after the semester is over, or sometimes even during while the semester's on. And then I guess if I could summarize the number one reason they come is because they say, you're someone I think I can talk to, which
Yeah,
means I'm not going to be judgmental about them saying fearful things, you know, like, I don't know if there's a God. I don't know if there's a hell, but I'm kind of worried about it. You know, those are not the things that you tell people. You just don't tell the average person that stuff. But they came to me because they believed, number one, I wouldn't be judgmental about it. I would just say, well, that's dumb. You should not do that. That, you know, you should, take action, you know, that sort of stuff. But I would actually listen and care about what they were struggling with. And then I
yeah,
would actually, again, not preach to them, but help them to think through, you know, to point them, here's sort of some questions to ask. Here's a way to think about this you know, and then when you thought about it, you know, let's talk some more, that sort of a
yeah.
thing. So and I think that's the key to why people have come
Sure.
to talk and ask. Yep.